Hey, good friends, welcome. Hey, it's Saturday, having a little red wine. Got a little time to start going over what happened in court this week in the Vallow Daybell case. If you are new to my channel, I forget sometimes to introduce myself and I just launch into stuff. So if you are new to my channel, my name is Lori Hellis, and I am a retired criminal attorney, did both prosecution and defense. And I have been covering the Lori Vallow case for since really the children were missing. I was living in Arizona, and it was a big story there because of Charles Vallow's death, and then of course because the children were missing and they had been Arizona residents for a long time. So I am an author, and I'm writing a book about the case. I'm under contract with Pegasus Books to produce a book about the case. I've promised I'm going to have my first draft to them by the end of the year. So I'm working like a little busy bee, getting it all done. So welcome. I moved from Arizona to Idaho in order to cover the case, and I am in the courtroom every day. So, I'm in the overflow room every day these days. So, I want to just dive right in. I do have a couple of announcements. Don't forget, if you are a quilter and you have noticed all these quilt squares on the wall, we've been doing a true crime quilt guild. I'm a little behind because of everything else that's been going on, but we're going to get that quilt finished. This one, when it's finished, I'm going to auction off, and the proceeds are going to go to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That reminds me, thank you very much for all of you folks who are so darn generous and send us super chats and PayPal donations. I just want to remind you that all of those donations go directly to our moderators. I am signed up, so you could buy me a coffee so I can be fully caffeinated for court. But those are the only things that come directly to me. Everything else goes to our mods because I couldn't do this without them. So let's dive in. First of all, y'all who've been here know that I had a dust up in the courtroom, and we've all talked about that. If you haven't heard about it, you can go listen to the surprise live from last week and catch up on it. Because here's the thing. I think it's personal. I think that it was a way for the judge to get a little of his back. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is we need to move forward, because I'm not giving that man any more real estate in my head or in my life. So we're moving forward, and we're going to talk about the case, because that's why we're all here, because we're interested in the case and in what's happening. And the reason why you're here with me is because you're interested in the legal issues. So we have 468 in chat, so we're going to dive in and y'all can catch up. So we came back from the Friday break from the weekend, and Zulema was still on the stand. So we finished up with Zulema. So I do want to go back and mention a few things about Zulema's testimony. Now, I'm reading my notes here because I took lots of them. But there were a couple of interesting things that I thought were worth mentioning. Zulema said she met Lori Vallow in the fall of 2018 at Melanie Gibbs' house. Melanie was having a fireside. Now, firesides are usually events that are organized by the church that meet in people's homes, and there's some sort of a small group kind of study of some kind. But these firesides were not sponsored by the church. They were done individually, and Melanie Gibb was having people over at her house to talk about things like preparedness. And Lori was there at Melanie's house, and she was talking about her experiences. Now, you all have heard her podcast before where she talks about the fact that she's a living witness of Jesus Christ, that he's appeared to her in person, that she has met Moroni, that she is visited by angels, and that she is has had a personal physical communion with Jesus. So Zulema was quite taken by this and said that it meant that is a person who has a high spiritual standing, because angels were putting names in her computer to do LDS family work in the temple. Lori was talking to Jesus and Moroni and the angels, and that gave her a lot of spiritual credibility. So then Zulema talked about the fact that she went with Lori and Melanie to the Preparing a People conference in St. George, Utah. Now, that was in October of 2018, and that's when Lori met Chad. So we've already heard that Lori already believed in multiple probations, that this was not new information to her. It was, however, new information to Melanie and Zulema, but Lori already had received that from somewhere. Now, we know there were other books out there during the time that she was reading Chad's books that talked about multiple mortal probations. Zulema said she had met Chad before at other Preparing a People conferences, as had Melanie Gibb. They'd always had just an acquaintance. So she and Melanie, Zulema, Lori, and 3 other women, there were 6 of them, Serena, Christina, and Nicole, I think. There were 6 of them that went to this Preparing a People conference. And when they got there, Lori and Chad met, and it was like fireworks. It was like they were immediately wanted to be in one another's presence all the time. So when the conference was over and the women were driving back from St. George, Utah to Arizona, Lori was driving and she asked them to look up James the Less, and wanted them to search for in scripture James the Less. Zulema then found some scripture passages that's unclear whether they were in the Bible actually, or whether they were in the Book of Mormon or Doctrine and Covenants, but they did find a reference to James the Less. He is reputed to be James, the brother of Jesus. And Chad Daybell had told Lori that he had been James in a prior life, and Lori had been his wife, Elena. Now, those 2 names are going to come up later when we hear the Loinfire texts. So they looked up scripture and they talked about James the Less. Lori didn't tell them why she was asking about that, but they did. Then there were many times that they met in Melanie's house, or they all met in Zulema's house, and Chad began telling them about the idea of these castings. The first time that Zulema learned of this idea of someone, evil spirit, being able to force a person's soul out of their body and inhabit their body, was from Lori. And Lori seemed as surprised and as confused by it as Zulema was. But they met a lot in Lori's houses and or in Zulema and Melanie Gibbs' homes, and they started doing castings. The castings were designed to force an evil spirit out of a body. But Chad also told them that if they didn't do something within the 2 seconds after they forced the spirit out of the body, they would then be inhabited by another and probably stronger spirit. So according to Chad, this is what happened to Charles Vallow. That Charles Vallow had Garrett, and they got Garrett out, and then Ned Schneider came and they got Ned Schneider out, and then Iplos came. And Iplos was a very old, very strong, very wise demon and was very difficult to get rid of. Chad also talked about the fact that the way to destroy the body was to dismember it, ding, 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 or to burn it, ding, ding, ding again. Zulema said that Lori had, in fact, told her, and Melanie confirmed. Zulema confirmed a lot of the things that Melanie had already testified to, that Lori had told her that Tylee was a zombie, that she had been inhabited by a demon. And there were some varying reports of whether or not it had just happened or whether she had actually been demon possessed since about age 12, which anybody who knows a child going through puberty might think they're demon possessed. So moving on, Zulema talked at length about the castings and the demons. Probably one of the most sort of bombshell kinds of information from Zulema was something that on its surface might not seem all that much weirder than everything else we've heard, but it is important. So the night that Tammy Daybell was shot at, so if you all remember, about 10 days before Tammy died naturally in her sleep, she reported on Facebook, this weird thing happened to me. I was getting out of my car and bringing home all my dinners from church and from the Relief Society. And lo and behold, there was a guy standing there with a paintball gun, and he took a shot at me. Well, later, I think they realized that this was not a paintball gun. It looked like one of those paintball guns that are made to look like a military weapon, because it was probably an AR-15. And she reported that when she yelled for Chad, the guy took off around the house. So later, law enforcement were able to pinpoint in Alex's phone that he was in the vicinity. So pretty clear, Alex took a shot at Tammy and missed. Not notoriously a great shot, apparently, because he also missed Brandon Boudreaux, thank goodness. So anyway, Lori had traveled to Arizona and was in Arizona and was at Zulema's home, and they were doing a casting to cast out the evil demon from Tammy Daybell. And so they go through their ritual. Then Lori calls Chad like she always does and says, "Tell me, did it work?" And he says, Zulema can only hear Lori's side of the call. So she hears Lori and reports what she says, that Lori is very, very scary angry. So Lori is stomping around, saying words like moron and idiot, and she's really mad. And she finally says, that idiot can't do anything right. He can't do anything unless somebody's right there with him. And it's clear that she is talking about her brother, Alex. Now, why is this important? There are a lot of websites out there where people will tell you what everybody said during these hearings, and you can get a blow-by-blow description. You can even go and listen. East Idaho News got all the testimony, all the recordings. You can go and listen. So I think the important part for us is that we talk about what it means. So what this means is that this connects Lori and Alex and Chad in the conspiracy. Remember, we've got to have that connection in that circumstantial chain that connects Lori, Chad, and Alex in order for it to be conspiracy. So this is an important bit of testimony coming from Zulema because that connects them. So Zulema said Lori had always had a connection with the numbers 7-11. So she was not surprised when Charles Vallow died on July 11th. And when it happened, Lori said that because it happened on 7-11, that it was God's will and God had delivered Charles to them. So Lori seemed very uncomfortable and swiveling back and forth in her chair when all that was going on. Zulema said over and over that Chad and Lori pressured her to move to Rexburg. And she kept saying she didn't really want to move, that she really felt like her job, her family, her home was in Arizona. So, but there's an interesting, and I haven't pinned this timeline down, and for all my web sleuths out there, y'all might be able to do it. But Zulema visited Lori. At the time when Zulema asked about Tylee, Tylee said she had to be, or Lori said of Tylee, she had to be free. And when Zulema asked where Tylee was, Lori put her palm in facing Zulema's face and said, "Don't ask." So, but the interesting part about this is Zulema visited with Lori before Melanie Gibb and David Warwick were there on the 22nd, which leads me to believe, let's look at the calendar here. It must have been the weekend before, because that would have been after Tylee disappeared, but before JJ disappeared and before David Warwick and Melanie Gibb were there. So just kind of made me go, So let me see. Oh, at one point, when Zulema asked Lori how they were going to afford all of these, the expenses of moving and how they were all going to afford to live once they were in Rexburg, Lori's answer was, "Don't worry about it because Melly has enough for all of us." Remember, Melanie Boudreau Pulowski had just gone through a divorce and received a sizable settlement from Brandon Boudreau. And I think there was also a hope that there would be some life insurance coming to Melly because Brandon was supposed to die. One of the things that was played was a recording as well as the written document of Chad's patriarchal blessing for Alex. And it's interesting. The recording, it's very clear on the recording that everyone is tearful and sniffling, and it's kind of interesting that they are that they give Chad, they assume that Chad has the, I don't know why I can't spit this out tonight. It's very clear that they believe Chad has the authority to give them a patriarchal blessing. My understanding is that only someone who has been granted the authority of a patriarch can give those blessings. So she went on to talk about Alex's death, about what happened there. Zulema keeps a journal, so at one point she drew a diagram. I didn't go back and recreate the diagram. It was just a few little circles, an oblong with some circles in it that seemed to illustrate that there were 5 worlds. Each one has a Satan and a savior. The earth is the 5th and the lowest and the darkest. And if a person dies, there's a 2-minute window when a demon can inhabit. And she talks about the fact that illustration was used to explain to her multiple probations and that they had all lived on other planets in other worlds. She said, Lori said Chad was the brother of Jesus and in another life was the Holy Ghost. Since Lori Vallow was his wife, she had been exalted to the same spiritual standing. And they taught ratings, the high, light and dark ratings, the high and low, the lowest being 1, the highest being 6. And once the demon is cast out, then in order to prevent another demon from entering, you have to burn, bind, or take the body apart. She then did, they asked her about who was rated what, and she went through that. They showed some pictures of her at preparing a people conferences. And that was about it. Her testimony kind of wound down. She did say that Chad said that you didn't need to be accountable in this world if you had been exalted in the last. So then I'm just going to look over the rest of my notes about Zulema. Jim Archibald conducted the cross-examination on Zulema. It was pretty lame, actually. He asked her what she said. She had forgotten the date she got married because there'd been so much trauma in her life. And he asked what trauma, and then she talked about Alex dying. And once again, he sort of challenged the idea that Alex would do anything for Lori. And Zulema was very clear that she felt that Alex would do whatever he was asked to by Lori and Chad, and everything had to be cleared by Lori and Chad. I think this was really the first time we saw a lot of interested or engaged kind of cross-examination. And to be honest, there wasn't a lot. he drew her attention to the text messages that she'd sent to Chad, asking him to send her healing blessings because she was sick or didn't feel well. Here was an interesting tidbit. Zulema was at the temple when Charles died, and in fact, Lori was supposed to be there too, and then didn't show up. So then we got to Colby. Now, Colby's testimony was really hard for him, hard for everybody. It was rough. They started out by Rob Wood questioning him, handing him photos of Tylee and JJ, both of them happy pictures, photograph of Charles Vallow. And Colby was choked up saying, "That's my sister. That's my little brother. That's my stepfather." Colby talked about his conversation with his mom about how Charles had died, that she told him Charles had died of heart attack. It wasn't until later, after Colby got off work, that he walked into the house. Al's sitting there watching TV with a bandage around his head, and he says, "What happened?" And Al tells him, Charles hit me with a bat, and I shot him." He reported that Lori frequently told him that she and Charles were out of money, and that there were money concerns. However, Lori continued to send Colby money and to support he and his family. Tylee received Social Security benefits because her dad was dead. And for most of the time, that money went into her account. But toward the end, he asked Tylee for money, and she said, "I don't have access to it anymore." Mom was controlling it. He talked to his mom. The last time he heard from Tylee, they were in the Yellowstone gift shop, and he could hear her in the background. He had a conversation with Lori about Tylee's money, and Lori said she was going to be using that money while she found a new job. On November 27th, Gilbert police came to Colby's door and asked whether the children were with him. He said absolutely not, and didn't know why Gilbert police were asking. That was when he found out that the children were missing. He then got a couple more Cash App transactions that said they were from Tylee, but obviously Tylee was already dead, so they had been sent by Lori. Jim Archibald then did cross. Colby said he wasn't sure if he was ever adopted by Joe Ryan. There's no evidence he was. They did a name change, but there was no evidence he was actually ever adopted by Joe Ryan. Colby's married and has 2 children, age 4 and 1. He said his mother had met his oldest daughter when she was a baby. His childhood with Joe Ryan was bad. And at that point, there was an objection and a sidebar, and the objection was sustained. The defense then asked, "Did your mother protect you from Joe Ryan?" And Colby said, yes, she protected Tylee from Joe Ryan by divorcing him and moving away. Said they had fun times growing up. Colby said he had struggles as a teenager that she helped him through. Athletics help. He was very depressed as a teen. Tylee was too. He says he left home at 17, later moved back home, got his GED. So did Tylee. He went to community college and he decided to do an LDS mission. Now, for those of you who are interested, Colby wrote a book, and a lot of this is in his self-published book. So he decided to do an LDS mission. He went to training. I'm not even sure if he actually left the training center before he decided that a mission was not for him and left. He asked her about Lori's teachings, whether she taught him about Jesus, whether they went to church, and then asked whether he taught her about, or Lori taught him about zombies and multiple probations and castings. And he said no, she didn't teach him that she was a goddess or in the 144,000. She didn't teach him that LDS Church is wrong or that he should be a part of the Church of the Firstborn, which was the church that Chad and Lori claimed they were founding. Colby said his relationship with Al was minimal. He described him as odd. He was crude and kind of funny and strange. Colby says after Lori met Chad Daybell, she changed. He talks about his childhood, never once thought his mom would hurt someone. He loved her and she loved him. The prosecution asked for a quick recess and everyone stands. Lori stands up and talks with her lawyers. Colby stands. So then the prosecution decides to play the video now, or the audio call between Colby and Lori Vallow. If you have not heard this call, I would urge you go on East Idaho News. They've got a clip of it, and go ahead and listen to it. It is heartbreaking. He starts out, Lori's in jail. He starts out the conversation. She says, "Hi, Colbs." You know, they start out the conversation, and she says, he says something like, "You can't hide from me." And she says, "Why would I hide from you?" And he says, "Because you murdered my siblings." And the call goes on from there. What's really interesting to me, what I found interesting, is the inflection in Lori's voice. She says, "I didn't, but I'm sorry you feel that way." They go on in the conversation. He's trying to get her to tell him what really happened. And her position is always, you don't know, you weren't there, you don't understand. And it's very clear from the conversation, she infers that whatever she has done to the children was done as a mercy, that she felt like she was sparing them. She goes on to say, "You don't know, you weren't there, nobody was there. They are fine, they love me, and we are still sealed together, and we will always be sealed together." So the call is very clear that Lori still thinks she did nothing wrong. And I believe that she is sitting in court today feeling the same thing. He says things on the call like, you tell me this is God's will for my whole family to be dead, including my stepfather. I was deceived and broken by my own mother. What are you doing? She says things like, you don't know. She seems to justify it based on the hundreds of days she was with Tylee in the hospital and all the trials that JJ had, and that it was a mercy. And she says, he says, I'm going to be in Idaho next week and you're going to look me in the eye. And she hangs up. So Colby was released as a witness, and there wasn't a lot more to be said. It was a hard call. It was hard for Colby to listen to. It was hard for him to testify about. And it's clear that this is a young man who is still devastated and heartbroken and struggling. So once again, I encourage all of you, please keep him in your hearts and in your prayers. And I hope sincerely that he is getting the help he needs. I think that he is a lost soul. The next witness was Mark Sari. He is a Social Security special agent, and he was there to talk about records information. He was there to talk about Social Security and record information. Now, this was pretty dry testimony, as was some of the other witnesses. However, it's important testimony because the jury needs to hear that kind of testimony in order to find the theft that goes along with the conspiracy to commit murder. There's conspiracy to commit grand theft. So they need to hear this information in order to make that connection. So it was pretty straightforward testimony. It wasn't anything we don't already know, that Tylee Ryan was getting Social Security because Joe Ryan was dead. Lori applied for Social Security for she and JJ both because of Charles Vallow's death, and they both began receiving benefits. And that was pretty much the end of the day. The next witness on Wednesday morning was Chuck Kunsaitis. I'm sure I'm butchering his name. And this was a lengthy discussion on the admission of evidence and a long discussion on the financial transactions. So he brought in the important information about where all of these bank accounts were, and Lori moving money between her account and Tylee's, and all of that really important information that was dead boring and was boring everyone to death. This is the point that the jury's eyes glaze over. And, it's information that they have to present and that the jury has to have, but it is boring. So the officer tried to make it as interesting as possible by making some timelines and some digests. So, some demonstrative evidence, as they call it, just stuff that sort of condensed and put all the information in one place. Timelines, graphs, those kinds of things. And I'm certain that was really helpful for the jury because it was a lot of information to digest. And we're talking about multiple accounts for Lori, multiple accounts for Tylee, multiple accounts with Charles. They talked about Chad's banking history, and there was a lot going on. So it was important information, and they did a good job of getting it all out there and getting it in a way that was the easiest to understand. The next witness was FBI forensic accountant Michael Douglas. The one interesting thing that came out of his observations was that a couple of days after Tammy's memorial service, after her funeral, Chad and all five of his children and Lori all went to Knott's Berry Farm. So they flew to California and they went to Knott's Berry Farm. Lori and Chad then went on to Hawaii and got married. The next witness was Scott Cowden. He was a Chandler Fire Department employee and a paramedic. They're back on Charles's death again, and he was there to prove that no one had tried to do CPR. His appearance was brief, no cross-examination. The next two were Detective Ariel Werther. He is Chandler Police Department robbery and homicide, and was going back to talk about Charles's murder. That was the point that, of course, there were more objections as 404B evidence, and the judge reread the jury instruction. And then Cassandra Inclan, she's also a detective with robbery homicide in Chandler, and there was a discussion about Lori's demeanor during on the scene and then during her interview. She was the detective who interviewed both Lori and Tylee back at the station. So, and the final witness was April Raymond. And April Raymond had plenty to say about what had been going on with Lori. You can, if you recall, hang on, I'm fumbling through my notes here. If you recall, the prosecution brought up the possibility that April Raymond had seen some TV coverage. It turned out that what April said was that Justin Lum had sent her a video of the recent interview he did with Lori's cousin. Now, Justin Lum says he didn't send April Raymond anything, that it must have been somebody else who sent Justin the interview. But nonetheless, she did see the interview that Justin did with Lori's cousin. So the judge inquired, decided that that was not really going to impact April's testimony, and went forward. April said that she and Lori met in 2016. They had a church branch, which is smaller than a ward because there weren't enough people to form a ward. They became friends, and they spent a lot of time, their kids spent a lot of time together. The family celebrated holidays together, and they got together 1 to 2 times a week. She said Lori was very involved in church, that she was the head of the primary education for children from school age to 12. And that they did a lot of church activities together. Lori and Charles moved back to the mainland and then in February of 2019, they stayed in touch, but, oh, excuse me, clearly not as often. And then in February of 2019, Lori just showed up on Kauai. She didn't tell April she was coming. She called April and from the airport and said, Tylee and I are here. They stayed in a hotel the first night, and then April invited them to stay with her the next day. Lori said she and Charles were separated and divorcing. Charles wasn't Charles. He was a demon named Ned Schneider. Lori said she was done with JJ and that Charles and his sister would have to figure it out. Lori moved to the Kauai Beach Resort, and Melanie Gibb joined them while Tylee went back to Arizona to work for her uncle, that's Summer's husband, in his chiropractic clinic. the first time that April Raymond, this was the first time that April had met Melanie Gibb, and Lori was talking all about all this new stuff, and Melanie Gibb corroborated what Lori Vallow had said. Charles was a demon. She'd had experience, and Lori Vallow said she'd had an experience in the temple that changed her. April Raymond called it a subtle grooming. Throughout the whole thing, Lori was telling April she was also one of the 144,000 and that she needed to leave her children behind in order to complete a mission. April said that when Lori Vallow visited her the time before, which had been in July of 2018, April had already noticed that Lori's beliefs had begun to change. And that was shortly before she met Chad Daybell. She met him in October of 2018. But she was already reading his books. Jim Archibald did some cross. April said Lori Vallow had a strong music background, so they did a lot of music teaching in primary. Jim Archibald goes into what children were taught, where they taught that Jesus cast out evil spirits, which was sort of interesting. April agrees that those things were taught, and but that the things that Lori had currently been saying were not things that were taught in primary. She also mentioned Jason Mao and Thor, and talking about a podcast group. Now, these are names we haven't seen. We haven't seen much of up until now in the trial, but there are certainly names that we've heard as this case goes along. Jason Mao was a retired police officer from Arizona, and he was the person who they started doing podcasts with. In fact, he claims that they stole his Time to Warrior Up title and started doing their own podcasts. So kind of interesting. The rest of the morning was taken up with a few more police officers and a few more of that on Thursday. And then David Warwick took the stand. Well, any of you who saw David Warwick's testimony during the preliminary hearing, he wasn't much different here. He's kind of older, a little bit hard of hearing, a little bumbling, and pretty self-righteous. So he told basically the same story, that he and Melanie had gone to visit Lori, that he has an autistic son who has Down syndrome. And so he tried to talk to JJ. JJ ignored him. He tried a couple of different times. Chad was trying to teach him about their beliefs, about the 144,000 and Satan being able to push the spirit out of the body. Melody and Lori were present and sort of chimed in that they felt that was true, but Chad dominated the conversation. David Warwick didn't believe any of it and told them so. He told Chad that if someone were going to be elected to the 144,000, that would be the job of the prophet of the church and not Chad Daybell. Chad really wanted David Warwick to come and see this piece of property. It was 80 acres near Chad's property. Now, David is a general contractor and he develops property. And I'm certain that Chad really wanted David to come and develop this property. And he wanted and David has money. So they really wanted David to be involved. So Chad Daybell said to them that he wanted to he wanted to show them. Hang on, I'm looking for the spot because I don't want to get this wrong. I wanted to show them a heavenly building that was on this 80-acre property. So Chad was able to see this vision of this heavenly building. David said he couldn't see it. I'm just about through what happened at trial, and then we're going to take all your questions. So David said he couldn't see the heavenly building, didn't get what Chad was talking about. And then they asked David to come and look at this property near Chad's house that was for sale. And David said, I don't do business on Sunday. I'll drive by and take a picture of it and I'll get in touch with the realtor, but I don't do business on Saturday. And so he drove out there. Actually, Alex Cox apparently led them out there, and he drove out there. And when he got to the property, Chad was there with the realtor. He once again said, I don't do business on Sunday. However, Chad was really eager for David to meet the realtor. They went back to Lori's place, and they wanted to do this podcast. So they set up on Lori's kitchen island, and JJ was not there. Lori said Alex was babysitting JJ in his apartment because she didn't want any distractions while they were doing their podcast. Then at about 10:30, he heard the door open. Alex came in carrying JJ. David did not remember what JJ was wearing. Now, there's a photograph of JJ sitting on the couch that same evening eating yogurt in his red pajamas. His body was later discovered still wearing his red pajamas. So, and a nighttime pull-up. So David says he doesn't remember what JJ was wearing. It might have been shorts. He wasn't sure. But that JJ was asleep on Alex's shoulder, and Alex brought him in and took him upstairs. That night, now, as David Warwick described it, and it came out in little bits and pieces, but he and Melanie Gibb were sleeping in JJ's room, and JJ was sleeping with Lori in her room. So in the middle of the night, Melanie Gibb, he's having a nightmare. Melanie Gibb wakes him up. He says it was the worst nightmare he'd ever had in his life. He's in a bit of a panic. Melanie jumps up and says, I'm going to go get Lori, and maybe she can call Chad and they can give you a blessing. She helps wake him up. Melanie runs to Lori's room. She knocks, no one answers. She tries the door, it's locked. She never raises anybody out of Lori's room, and finally she goes back. David says the next morning when they get up, David asks where JJ is, and Lori says he was being a zombie and crawling all over everything and climbing up on the upper cabinets and above the upper cabinets. And I just decided I'd had enough. And so Alex came and got him. David Warwick volunteered that he didn't see any evidence that there had been any scuffle or anything going on in the kitchen. And that he didn't see any scuff marks on the cabinets or anything else that would indicate that JJ had been there and been out of control. David Warwick admitted that he lives in Utah and that Melanie Gibb lives in Arizona and that they have a long distance marriage right now. He didn't really get into it, but he did admit that that he doesn't have much contact with her. After her testimony, he hadn't talked to her in a week other than exchanging a text message where she told him she was back in Arizona. So the the prosecution then said that they felt their next witness was going to be very lengthy. I suspect it's going to be their DNA expert. And court adjourned and said no court on Friday. So the judge said, this case is moving along a lot faster than we expected. And to allow everybody to catch up and to catch up with the scheduled witnesses, we're not going to have court on Friday and we'll resume on Monday. People have been very surprised when I have said I would not be shocked to see this case go to the jury next week. The defense is not putting on much of a defense. I don't even know if they will put on witnesses. Their defense has been basically no defense. I think they are relying on their opportunity to appeal some of the judge's earlier rulings, like the 404B rulings. And I think that's where they've got all their eggs in that basket. I don't see them mounting a vigorous defense, not based on what we've seen so far. And I would not be surprised to see this go to the jury late next week or very early the following week. I could be wrong. My crystal ball could be foggy. We could all be wrong, but I think that's at the pace that they're going right now. I think that's what we're looking at. Now, we had heard the scuttlebutt was, even though they were telling the jury 8 weeks, people were talking about 4 to 5 weeks behind the scenes. And that was before we saw how quickly this has been going. So, well, that is the wrap up from the trial. And I'm ready to take some questions. I'm going to get a drink of water here because you can hear it in my voice. And I'm ready to take some questions. I think the best value of our show is the fact that we talk about what this means, not just what the facts are. So, Momo Shark says, Chad sent money to his kids while he was in the car awaiting the search in the backyard. That did come up as one of the financial transactions. He couldn't pay for a flight, but sending money to his kids. I don't know whether he could pay for a flight or not. I just think that they were intent that, you know, she was going to get money. She was going to have all this money from Charles dying. So I think that they were counting on it. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of weird transactions that went on. I mean, who goes to Disneyland with their Knott's Berry Farm? Who goes to Knott's Berry Farm with their 5 adult children and doesn't go to Disneyland practically next door? I don't know. The whole thing is kind of odd. But Lori and Chad did then leave from there and go off to Hawaii where they got married. So, Joe Jake, do you think the jurors have already made up their mind on her guilt? Yeah, I think they have. So here's my feeling. My feeling is that it is the job of the defense to give the jury a reason to listen for reasonable doubt. And that happens in opening statements. And that didn't happen in opening statements with Jim Archibald. He got up, he droned on, he told everybody, thanks for paying your taxes so I can get paid. He got up and told everybody his office had been bombed 8 years ago. He sort of talked a little bit about reasonable doubt, but he didn't really. And, you know, he ended with a whimper and not a cry. So I feel like he never gave the jury a reason to listen for reasonable doubt. The time to give the jury that reason is in the beginning, not in closing arguments when you're trying to wrap up all the loose ends. That's not the time to tell the jury, here's all the reasonable doubt, because they have already made up their mind. The time to tell the jury what they're looking for is in the beginning. And Jim Archibald didn't do that. So, yeah, I think the jury has made up their mind. One of my questions, though, is has the jury made up their mind based on the facts in this case, or have they made up their mind based on the facts of Charles Vallow's death? I think that the state went too far and offered too much about Charles's death. Now, I agree that they needed to bring that in. They needed to bring it in for several reasons. One, they needed to be able to show this common scheme or plan, that it was a motive, that there was this common scheme for them, that they were getting rid of all their spouses. It wasn't just Tammy. They were getting rid of all their encumbrances. So certainly it had to come in, but they have gone back to it over and over and over. And the reason they've done that is because it connects up the conspiracy dots. But have they offered it to the point where Lori's being prejudiced by it? I think that they have harped on Charles's death, even though they are not being tried for Charles's death, and made this a case about Charles Vallow's death. That's a problem on appeal. And so I'm concerned about the fact that they've really driven home Charles's death. The reason why is because that's the place they can make the conspiracy connection. It's easy for them to connect Charles and to Alex and Lori and Chad to some extent with the conspiracy to murder Charles. It's easy to make those connections. It's easy to make and then to use that to extrapolate that to the murders of the children and Tammy. So I'm not convinced that that was the best way to approach the case and prove the conspiracy, but that's where they went. And there's been a lot of objections over that 404B evidence. And I think that to some extent, the defense is right. And so I think they should be nervous about that. But JJ, to answer your question, I think they have already made up their mind. And I think they will bring back a guilty verdict. And I think it will be quick, like Murdoch. Iriska, how are you? Can you talk Judge Boyce's ruling on your motion? People are sharing on Facebook that 30 records you said were sealed, Judge said were already public. Why did he say I didn't submit a records request? I hope and think they're wrong. So I did submit a records request, but here's the issue. Freedom of Information Act is a national recommended law. So the federal government issues this uniform law that they say at all the states, we'd really like it if you'd pass this law. But the states have the opportunity to adjust their Freedom of Information Act or any other of their uniform acts so that it meets that state's need. So in Arizona does not have an exception for records prior to a trial. So, but Idaho does. So Arizona released all of their records because they couldn't withhold them. But the state of Idaho has withheld those records. So making a Freedom of Information Act records request, which I did do, was useless because all of those, I was told, they're all exempt until after the trial. So the second thing is that one of the problems with the court's register and the way that the court listed documents, documents are not available to the public unless you go to a kiosk at the courthouse and look at the documents. unlike most states, you can't just sign in to the public access portal and look at documents. So oftentimes the only documents that you get are the ones that are listed on the cases of interest that you can get access to. Additionally, what the judge was doing was in the court's database, it would say order, wouldn't say what the order was for, or it would say order to seal, but it wouldn't say what it sealed. And so the court's docket is very difficult to unravel. There were documents that I asked for that the judge said were already public. There were a few that the judge said, you're right, they shouldn't have been sealed, and unsealed them. The judge did not unseal the records I wanted most. And I hope that once Lori's trial is over, he will not have any grounds to continue to keep those records sealed. So part of it is that the court's docket, the way that the judge has had his court staff enter things into the database, it's virtually impossible to tell what order to seal applies to which order and what order is actually sealed, because they don't say that in the court's database. I don't know if that was intentional or whether it was just sloppy. I don't know. But I'm glad you asked this question, because you asked on another show I was on, and I said it's a longer answer than you probably want to hear, and so I'm glad you came back and asked it. It was easy for the judge to say. It was easy for the judge to point out that I had made mistakes, because I was pointing out his mistakes. And to this day, he's not taken responsibility for any of those mistakes. He's doubled down on all of them. So we'll see once the trials are over and he no longer has any justification for keeping those records sealed, then we'll see what's in them. So I'm concerned about what's in some of those documents, and it will be really interesting to see that when I get my hands on them. Kathleen Smith, who do you still think still needs to testify? We haven't heard from the medical examiner or about the DNA. Yeah, I was thinking about that actually today. I was working on some chapters, and we have not heard from the medical examiner. We haven't seen any autopsy reports. We haven't heard, and I think that's what's coming on Monday. I think we're going to get DNA and autopsy reports coming up shortly. The other thing we haven't heard about, there was the, when they brought the jail supervisor in to authenticate the jail calls, they offered 3 jail calls, one from between Lori and Colby, one was the June 9th call between Lori and Chad when he's sitting in his driveway. The third one is a video call between Lori and Summer. That one I'm super interested in, and we haven't seen that yet. So I'm assuming that we're going to hear that one because they've already introduced it. How they're going to introduce that, I don't know. I'm assuming Summer is going to be called as a witness. So I think we're going to hear more about let me think. We've gotten in all the financial stuff. We've gotten in all of the information from Charles's death. We've gotten in all the information from, I don't know, we might hear witnesses having to do with Alex Cox, because we haven't heard a lot about him. We haven't heard what kind of person he was. We have not heard he tried to tase Joe Ryan. That would be interesting for them to bring in as a point of, he was Lori's hitman, he was Lori's henchman. So it's possible they could try and bring that in. So I think we're going to see more about Alex Cox, perhaps, and I'm sure we're going to hear medical examiner, autopsy, DNA, all of that information is going to come in. The prosecution said during their opening that Tylee's DNA was found on the tools in Charles's shed. Why would Tylee's DNA be anywhere near, I said Charles, Chad's shed? So that's pretty interesting. I have seen a couple of incredibly generous donations go by in the chats, and I just want to say thanks so much, because all of this goes to our moderators who are incredibly supportive of me. They're the ones sending me text messages, talking to me throughout the week, and making sure that I'm supported. So thank you for supporting them. I think, I'm not sure there are too many other people who need to testify. So I think we're getting down toward the end. And it will be interesting to see whether the defense bothers to even call a witness. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. You're awesome too. We have never heard anything about Janice taking the stand. We've heard conflicting reports about whether Janice was in Boise or not. I had somebody who's very familiar with the case and all the players who swore that Janice was in the grocery store across the street from the hotel just up the block from the courthouse. And it would make sense. It's an extended stay hotel, and that she was there. And we have not heard that she was going to take the stand. So I have concluded that she was there with Summer. On the other hand, somebody else has said that they talked to her and she said she was not in Boise. So I don't know. We don't know whether she's there or not. I can't confirm it. And we can't confirm whether she was really in Boise and lying about being there. Who knows? But I don't know that she will take the stand. I'm not sure what she could add to the relevant information. She doesn't have a lot to add to it, perhaps other than her conversations with Lori. They haven't offered any of her recorded conversations with Lori. So I suspect she won't be testifying. Lori Newton, who, if anyone, would the defense call in? Well, that's tough. It's very difficult to determine. And remember, we have another really high visibility trial going on, which does have cameras in the courtroom. So I'm sure that you all have been also following Letitia Stout. I have not been following it enough to know this judge's name, but the judge in that case has done an excellent job with a really difficult defendant. And I would say the prosecution has also done a really good job. I have not been able to listen to all of it because of this, but I have been following it, listening to it as much as I can. I'm telling you what, I have just gotten to the point where every time there's a phone call with her, I have to fast forward through it because that woman's voice is just like nails on a blackboard. But I think that it is interesting because in her case, they are talking about a not guilty by reason of insanity defense. So they're going to be calling mental health professionals to talk about her insanity. This is another case where I think an insanity defense is going to be really difficult because she did so much in furtherance of her plan and so much afterwards to cover it up that showed her consciousness of guilt. What they have done is they have gone to a defense of dissociative personality disorder. Now, I am not a psychologist, don't play one on TV, but dissociative disorder used to be one of the one of the types of dissociative disorder was multiple personality disorder. Early on in Letitia's case, they were talking about the fact that when she disassociates, she can do things without, and it's like she's somebody else. I don't think that's going to fly for her, and I don't know what kind of a defense they're going to offer for Lori, because I think they did have a defense, and that was her mental health defense. I'm not sure that would have flown either, but at least it would have given them something. This case, in my mind, comes down to this question: when does religious delusion become a mental illness? And when does a religious delusion become criminal behavior? And I think that even if they had not gone to the mental health defense, I think they could have planted some reasonable doubt by saying, folks, this woman was raised in this very insulated bubble. And each time she moved out of that insulated bubble, she was drawn back in by her family, by her faith. She got to this point where she felt like she needed something deeper, something more meaningful, and into that vacuum poured all these strange doctrines. This was a woman who was vulnerable because of her belief system. And regardless of her mental health, the claims for her mental health, I think I would have made the argument this is a woman who was vulnerable because of her belief system. And because she had grown up with that belief system, it has been so deeply inculcated into her being. She was vulnerable to manipulation by outside forces. Now, this doesn't say anything about her mental health condition. It doesn't say she's schizophrenic, she has delusions, none of that. What it says is that these people who rushed into that vacuum and filled it with these strange beliefs led her to do something that she would not have otherwise done. Because I don't know how you get around that call with Colby Ryan any other way. How do you get around this with her standing there saying, you weren't there, you don't know. They still love me. We're still sealed. We're going to be together. They still love me. You don't know, you weren't there. And intimating this idea of I saved them. So I don't know that the defense really has anybody that they're going to be able to call to talk about what happened in any way that is going to poke reasonable doubt into the prosecution's case. Now, I got to say, I think the prosecution has done a serviceable job. Have they done a Creighton Waters, Alec Murdoch job? Nope, they haven't. But they have done a serviceable job. And I think they have brought sufficient evidence to prove their case. My biggest concern is we still don't have that causal link pinned down. And I'm hoping that that may come from the medical examiner and DNA evidence that we're going to get next week, because we really just need to have that last link in the chain. And I don't think we're quite there yet. I think that the jury could potentially jump over that gap, but I wouldn't rely on them doing that. So, good question. Beverly Alfred, thank you for your gift. Hi, Lori. I hope you're having a restful weekend. How many, if any, of the witnesses we're seeing in Lori Vallow's case will we also see in Chad's trial? Good questions. You're not going to see anything in Chad's trial having to do with Charles Vallow. Because the folks in Maricopa County, the prosecution there decided that there wasn't sufficient evidence to charge Chad. So you're not going to see any of that. I am having a restful weekend, by the way. The rest of the witnesses, you're going to see all of the law enforcement witnesses from from Fremont and Madison County. You're probably going to see potentially some of uh, other people who knew Chad and were involved with him and his books or his teaching. But I don't know that you're going to see. You probably are not going to see a lot of Melanie Gibb or Zulema. You might see one or the other of them, but you'll probably see one or the other of them, probably Zulema, to talk about the castings and about her communications with Chad. It appears that Melanie Gibb didn't have as close a relationship with Chad as Zulema got as they were going forward. So I think it's possible that you may see Zulema. I don't think you'll see Colby. I don't think that you will see any of the information come in about Charles's murder. And that's going to make a much shorter trial. You are sweet as whole, Ms. Hellis. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah is the best. She sends me YouTube videos of songs and music that she loves. And she just sends me all sorts of encouragement, and I appreciate it to no end. So I'm hoping at some point I'm going to get to Portland and we're going to be able to meet IRL, as they say, for coffee or a drink. So thanks so much, Sarah. Your support means the world to me. And while I am not going to let anybody stop me from doing this, and I'm not going to let anybody take up real estate in my head, the sweet messages that you sent me this last week mean the world to me. I'm learning how to be in the public eye, and it is a learning curve. So I appreciate that you are all there with me. I want to, I just noticed Brown Eye Girl posted something, and I want to encourage all of you. In the next week or so, we are going to do our last push for bracelets. Of course, I don't have one on. Our Justice for Tylee and JJ bracelets, wristbands. And here's the reason. I'm going to make sure that I have gotten all of your notes from my P.O. box. I'm going to get all of those out in the mail, because on verdict day, I want you all to flood the internet with pictures of your wristbands. I want everybody out there to be wearing a wristband and showing it on social media. I want YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, everywhere. I want y'all posting your pictures of your bracelets for JJ and Tylee. So please, in the next day or so, if you have not sent me a self-addressed stamped envelope, please do so. And I'm going to clear the P.O. box, and I'm going to send them all back out. So we really just want to be supporters of Kay and Larry and Kresha and all those folks who have been going through it for all this time, for Colby, for all of them. So we can go back to a few more questions. We have over 1,000 people in the live. Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate so much that we have lots of new viewers. We've added 1,000 viewers in the last week and a half. Thank you for that. I also want to thank Harvard lawyer Lee, who has me on her show, and all her followers. And I also want to thank Joel and all his viewers at Surviving the Survivor. It's a blast being on with them. And so I'm happy to go anytime anybody invites me. Denicia Rose, pretty name. Question, do you think the prosecution is relying too much on Arizona's evidence? Side note, why aren't they going in chronological order? They're all over the place. This is a good question. It's hard sometimes to go in chronological order because sometimes you need a witness, a foundational witness, before you can bring in the next thing. So, for example, you need to bring in the jail calls before you can then later bring in the people who made the jail calls, or you need to bring in the DNA before you can bring in the results. And there's a whole variety of reasons why prosecutors don't go in chronological order. Remember that there's also an emotional what do I say, pattern to a trial, just the same way as there is to a novel or any other story. There are emotional peaks and then down, and that happens in any story, whether it's a trial or a novel or a story you're telling around the fire pit. So sometimes the prosecution is trying to gauge those emotional highs. So we bring Colby in, and then we have boring financial testimony, and then we bring somebody else in, emotional, and then we have more scientific testimony. So that's part of it as well. But often it just has to do with trying to get information in that builds on itself. And that's not necessarily chronological. The other is sometimes witnesses just aren't available in a chronological order. Sometimes, for example, David Warwick was supposed to testify when Melanie Gibb did. He's been very ill. It sounds like he's had COVID, although he didn't say it. He's been very ill, and he wasn't able to come because he was sick. So they had to rearrange things, and they had to bring him in later. That's just kind of the nature of trials. They're very fluid. So the other question, do I think they're relying too much on Arizona's evidence? Yeah, I think they're relying too much on the murder of Charles Vallow. It's hard for a jury to understand. You can't use that information to prove Lori's a bad person who would kill her children. You can only use it to prove that she had a motive, or that there was a common scheme or a plan that she was carrying out. That's a fine distinction with people who are not lawyers. So I think that they have overplayed their hand when it comes to Charles's murder, and I think that's going to bite him on appeal. That's my 2 cents, my opinion. But we'll see whether or not that is actually the case. Anytime you're dealing with evidence that can be used for more than one purpose, it's a little dangerous because, like I say, jurors are not lawyers, and they don't parse language and the law the way that lawyers do. I mean, lawyers will argue for 100 years how many angels it takes can dance on a pin. And the average everyday person is not going to do that. They're going to go, oh, it's this or it's that. So that is a problem. And I think it's going to come up on appeal. So I do believe that the prosecution has overplayed Charles Vallow's death. I understand why they did it. They did it because it so clearly makes the connection. And it so clearly proves that there was this common scheme to get rid of all their spouses. So you guys have got some great questions tonight, as usual. And I appreciate that you're all doing such a great job of learning about the law and coming back with really smart, on top of it questions. So, because that's what we're all about here, is not just talking about the facts, but talking about how they apply to the law. Janet, question: why did Alex buy 46 guns in 10 weeks? I find it interesting that he quit his job, took out a $21,000 loan, bought all that guns and ammo. There's something here. Absolutely, there's something there. So here's what happened for those who maybe haven't been following the trial as closely as I have. when the financial guy testified, he testified that Alex quit his job to move to Rexburg. He was working for, it had a really nice name, like Evergreen Environmental Services. It was the porta potty company that serviced the porta potties. Anyway, he left that job. But before he left the job, he took out a $21,000 loan from sort of a second-rate loan company, like one step above a payday loan. And what the financial stuff showed is that he made, and I could see how this could be confused, but what they said was he made 46 gun-related purchases. So some of those were silencers and ammo and gear related to the guns. So he didn't buy 46 guns, but he bought a lot of guns. And he quit his job and bought all these guns and moved to Rexburg because he was absolutely convinced that Lori and Chad had him absolutely convinced that the tribulation was coming, that the earthquakes were going to happen, that as David Warwick said, the United States is going to be attacked by China and Russia. There's going to be a war. There's going to be tribulation. And we're all going to be moving to these white camps. And in order to do that, we have to be able to protect ourselves. And Alex is one of our warriors. He's there to protect us. You can see where that is all going. And I truly believe that Alex thought that it was going to happen imminently. Remember, Melanie Gibbs said, and I don't remember in whether it was in a phone conversation, maybe her interviews, I don't remember where. But when she was asked, why in the world would somebody do this and hide the bodies in the backyard? And she said, because they believed that there was going to be so much chaos in the world so soon, nobody would notice them. Nobody would notice what they'd done. Nobody would pay any attention to the fact that their spouses were gone. Nobody would notice. The world was going to be in such chaos, nobody was going to pay any attention to them. I think that Alex was in that same mindset. I think he believed that the tribulation was here and that he was a warrior and he was going to be responsible to take care of people. I mean, I think it's even possible that he believed that on the day he died, that was the beginning of the tribulation. So, yeah, they had a lot of strange beliefs and a lot of strange purchases. Hi, Tracy. Thank you for your generous support for our mods. Do you think Lori could demand her attorney allow her to testify? I feel she's narcissistic enough to think she would have the ability to sway the jury. Well, there's a lot of disagreement about this. If Lori decides that she wants to testify, her attorneys cannot stop her. That is a decision that she and she alone gets to make. So I sort of look at it differently. While Lori has always been narcissistic, I also believe that there is enough of the compliant woman that if her attorneys tell her it's not a good idea, that she will take them seriously. A lot of other people say, nope, she's narcissistic enough. She thinks that she's God's goddess. She's going to get on the stand because she thinks that she can fix it all. So I don't know. She has the absolute right to testify if she wants. She also has the absolute right to refuse to testify. Neither thing can be held against her. So we'll wait to see. There is a pound of Starbucks coffee riding on it, and my bet is she doesn't testify, but I guess we'll have to wait and see because it is her alone. And do I think it will sway the jury? Absolutely not. No more than it swayed the jury in the Alec Murdaugh case. Flashback. I'm amazed by how little new information has been revealed thus far. Do you think more details are forthcoming, such as who killed whom, how, and where they died, etc.? I'm beginning to think that we have heard the bulk of the evidence. Opening statement, they asked, would you be able to find guilty even if you didn't know how or where the person died? I think that is very true about particularly Tylee. I don't think that they were ever able to determine how Tylee died, or for that matter, where. So we have not heard from medical examiners, so we don't know whether or not there are any additional findings for JJ and for Tammy that would be helpful. But I am pretty certain that they don't know for certain who actually took the lives of the children. I think everyone has jumped to the conclusion that that was Alex, that perhaps he had help from Chad, but who knows? We don't know. It has not been stated who took Tammy's life, although the cast of characters is smaller because of who was in the house. And we do know that Alex's phone pinged in a church parking lot nearby Chad's house at the time that Tammy died. So we don't know whether he was there to help or not. I agree that there's not been a lot of new information that's come out, and this just sort of goes to my my conclusion that none of those sealed documents helped her get a fair trial at all, because we'd already heard it all. So the purpose of sealing the documents to withhold things didn't work. The one thing, the things that we have not seen yet that are probably relevant are going to be the medical examiner's reports. So, Diane O'Brien, why are you sleeping? Hi, Compassionate RN. Question: am I going to seek to interview Colby, Chad, Lori, or her family for the book? Absolutely. I am going to try and interview every one of them. I think that having the opportunity for them to process what happens at trial and having the opportunity to perhaps tell their side of the story is really important. And I am absolutely going to try and interview every one of them. Will I get interviews? Don't know. I don't know yet, but we'll see. I sort of expect that if Lori's current attorneys have anything to say about it, I'll never get close to her, but we'll see. And the same for Chad. I have talked to Colby before. It's been a while, and we'll see. I think that Colby probably will be interested in continuing to talk about it and processing. Now, Colby's written a book. His book is intended to be more than one volume, and his book actually ends before the kids go missing. So he hasn't told that portion of his story yet. So we'll see. But I'm happy to do that. It must be dog treat time because my whole family just went herding down the hall. Husband and dogs. Sandy Burbank, do you think that given Lori's trial that Chad will seek a plea deal? Do you think the prosecution in his trial will permit a plea deal? Yes to both. I think that it is very common when when you have co-defendants, when one trial happens first, for the other to say, I've now seen all the evidence, maybe I'll figure out a way to take a plea. And yes, I think with the death penalty off the table for Lori, I think that they will take the death penalty off for Chad as well. And I would not be at all surprised to see Chad take a deal. I think that the likelihood went up substantially once the cases were separated and now that Lori's trial's underway. Good question. I'm certain that the prosecution would like not to try this case a second time. So I think they would be very open to making a plea deal. Are Chad and Lori still together? Are they allowed to speak to each other? Good question. That's from Momo Shark. As far as we know, Chad and Lori are still together, as much as they can be. My supposition, although I have not confirmed this, we know that they were allowed one phone call that was unmonitored that they were able to have in July of last year, I think, that their attorneys set up. We also know that her attorney asked for her to be able to meet with Chad because they felt like it might help move things along to settlement. The judge denied that request. And I am presuming that, like any other inmate, they can get mail and they can send and receive mail. Mail is always recorded and altered or censored. So they're writing letters back and forth to one another. Every letter is copied. Every letter is screened to make sure that it doesn't contain any harmful information. So they are still together. They are not divorced. I have heard from a source that Chad has photographs up in his cell, and they are photographs of his children and Tammy, but there are no photographs up in his cell of Lori. Interesting. I can't confirm that because I'm not in Chad's cell, but that's what I've heard from some fairly believable sources. Lori Newton, will you continue with this YouTube channel after all the Vallow Daybell cases are over? Thanks for getting me hooked on true crime, by the way. You are so welcome. If I got to be hooked on true crime, y'all have to too. Yeah, I think so. I think that we'll continue to talk about other cases because it's a blast to be with you. And when I'm not here, I miss you all. So I think I will continue to do it once the Vallow Daybell cases are over. The trials are going to be over, but we're still going to be, there's still going to be things just like Murdoch. I mean, Mandy Matney's still talking about Murdoch and about all the other stuff surrounding Murdoch. So there'll still be things to talk about once the trials are over. And of course, there are so many other cases. So I would love it if we could continue to do that. We could continue to, oh my gosh, I always point the wrong direction, quilt together. And I think I've had a blast doing it. And so I'm hoping that I can keep doing it and y'all will keep sticking with me. Carmen Within, with an E on the end. Why do you think Lori gave an alibi before the trial started? That I know. And how is that allowed? That I know too. And what's the defense angle on that? So the rules of criminal procedure say that if a defendant is going to raise any sort of an alibi defense, they have to do it prior to trial and give the other side notice. Varies from state to state about how much. In this state, I believe it was 90 days. So 90 days before the trial date, they had to announce whether or not they were going to claim an alibi defense. That gives the other side time to look into the alibi and decide whether or not it holds water. So that's the reason why it's allowed, because you want to give the other side the opportunity to do investigation. So in this case, it was an alibi that wasn't an alibi. What they said was Lori was in Hawaii when Tammy Daybell died. Well, we also know that she was in Arizona the week before and was doing castings to cast the evil demons out while her brother was taking shots at Tammy. So the very idea that her being in a different place exonerates her clearly doesn't go to the idea of a conspiracy, because you can do a conspiracy from anywhere. So, and you don't necessarily have to be at the place where the crime is attempted when it's attempted. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is that it's, I mean, what they say is when the children were murdered, which we're not exactly sure when, it was in Alex's apartment, and Lori was in her own apartment, and she was with Melanie or Chad or David Warwick or a cast of thousands. So from a legal standpoint, that alibi notice was absurd. The very idea that they were going to try and offer an alibi for conspiracy to begin with is silly. And the idea that she was in her apartment and the kids were murdered in Alex's apartment, so far we haven't seen any evidence that that's true. So we may hear something from DNA experts, but frankly, finding Tylee or JJ's DNA in Alex's apartment doesn't really prove anything. Let's think it through. I mean, my husband had one of his good friends from high school here all weekend visiting. I'm certain that if somebody came through, they would find his DNA in my home. Does that mean I murdered him? No, it means he visited. Tylee and JJ were in and out of those apartments. I mean, we know that because we know Alex took JJ back to his apartment when he was misbehaving. So I don't know how concrete we're going to get when it comes to that DNA evidence. And I think the alibi was worthless. They did it because they were statutorily required to do it, and it allowed them to ask questions and sort of poke some holes in things. But I think it was pretty empty. Nana. And I don't know what those letters mean. WWG1, WGA. Okay. Do I think this case will be retried on appeal? Yep. I think Lori's going to get a new trial. I think the issues of the 404B evidence are weighty enough and of question enough that I think she will get a new trial. I know nobody wants to hear that. I don't want to hear that either, but that's where we are. I just, out of the corner of my eye, caught a comment in chat from Sarah. Says Brian Kohberger waived his speedy trial. As far as I know, he has not waived his speedy trial. Speedy trial clock doesn't start until there's an indictment. What he has waived is his right to a speedy indictment. So initially, he was set for a preliminary hearing in June. The defense said they needed more time to get ready for preliminary hearing, and so he waived his right to a speedy indictment. So he waived his right to the speedy preliminary hearing. But since the speedy trial clock doesn't start to run until you're indicted, I don't believe he's waived speedy trial. See, this is why I need to stay on after Vallow and Daybell, because there's so many other things. Mary Speth, where does that tape fingerprint come in? Next week? Oh, I think you're talking about the DNA that was found on the fingerprint on the, yeah, yes, I think that comes in. I think it'll come in next week, because next week I think is going to be forensic week. We're going to get DNA, we're going to get the hair samples, we're going to get any trace evidence that was found on the bodies. We're going to get, and so we're likely going to get that additional, the fingerprint that was found in the tape. Yeah. Yep. I think next week's going to be our scientific week. And then if they want to end on an emotional high, they might end with summer. Good questions, you guys. Cheryl McKay, is there any research on the followers who drank the Kool-Aid to know whether death or deaths connected to them will be deemed questionable? I have not heard anything about this. I've heard that there still are people who are um, embracing the same teachings as Chad. I don't know whether they're following Chad particularly, but they certainly are embracing those same teachings and are still preparing for the end of the world. And a lot of them are still in the Rexburg area. I've heard that, but we haven't heard anything about suspicious deaths being connected to any of those other people. That's a good question, though. Jenny Meow Meow. Does a retrial require all new court staff other than the defense attorneys? No, no. The same judge could retry the case. The appeals court could say this needs to go back and have a new trial. The same judge could try the case, and the same prosecutors could prosecute it. So it does not necessarily mean you get a whole new cast of characters. When we have no idea whether her defense attorneys would continue on or not. Ada Van, oh dear, my husband's in the other room yelling. He's watching college baseball, so hopefully they just made a home run. Ada Van, how is determined which attorney questions which witness? Oh, this is a good question. It is completely up to the defense and prosecution teams. They decide. So sometimes it comes down to, for example, that's so interesting. I always get this weird little glitch in StreamYard when my computer goes from daytime to nighttime and the dark screen comes up. I don't know why. All you computer geeks out there, you can tell me why that happens. Usually when you're looking at who's going to ask what questions, they're going to aim for the attorney that has the best rapport with that particular witness, especially on the prosecution side. So as the prosecution's preparing their case, they're going to be saying, okay, so which of us has a good rapport with this particular witness? This is why Rob Wood questioned Colby. Which of us has a better demeanor when it comes to talking to the police officers, or which one? So sometimes it's as simple as who's got time to prepare this witness. If it's not a witness that you're trying to elicit emotional content from, like Kay or Colby or Melanie or Zulema, then it's a little bit more open to who's got time to prepare the witness and prepare the questions. But in general, you want the prosecutor who has the best relationship with the witnesses. On the defense side, that again depends on, if the defense is putting on witnesses, you want to have the attorney who's prepared the witness and has a good rapport with them. But if they're doing cross-examination, then it really is just a matter of kind of switching off back and forth. Good questions, though. Carolyn, I think there could be a bombshell piece of evidence to make the final link. Is this possible? Oh, it's always possible. If there is a bombshell that's going to come out to make the final link, it's going to be in the scientific evidence. Because everything we've seen right now is a very clear chain link, circumstantial case. And it's been really methodical, and they've pretty much connected the dots all the way along. But that final link could very well be a piece of bombshell DNA. I hope so. I hope that the jurors aren't going to be left wondering, where is it? Where's that final link that gives me confidence? But we're not going to know until next week because we're not privy to the witness list. We don't have any idea who's going to be called next. Barty B. You mentioned Kay and Larry were in the overflow room. Do you know why? And did they stay there all day? They didn't stay all day. It was the first time I'd seen them in the overflow room. I've been in the overflow room a couple of times before I got sent to Siberia. I had not seen them there before, but let me just tell you about the overflow room. It's definitely more comfortable. The chairs are more comfortable. The seating is you're not jammed together with other people because there's not all that many people in there. It is you can come and go as you need. So if you need to get up and go to the bathroom, you can do that. You can have snacks in there. You can take your coffee. So I don't really know why they were there. It could have been just as simple as they wanted to come in where they could have snacks and a coffee. I don't know. I didn't get a chance to talk to them. The next time or the lunch break they left, and I didn't see them back in there. So I don't know why they were there. It could be just as simple as they were tired of the courtroom and the hard chairs. So. Grammy B in NC. Question. It sure seems the defense isn't going the available distance with some of their cross exams. Thoughts as to why? Well, the evidence is hard. I mean, the evidence against her is difficult. And they had the option to really go after her beliefs and to paint her as a vulnerable person who was open to those odd teachings, that was vulnerable, and they have not done that. I firmly believe that they are avoiding those issues because of the church, because of all their church membership. Now, I know I get pushback on this when I say everybody but John Pryor are members of the church. However, as far as I know, they are all members of the church. I understand that Judge Boyce, since he was elevated from magistrate to district court, has not been seen in church. This is not uncommon for a judge. Judges start minimizing their social contacts because it puts them in touch with people who might appear in front of them. Does it mean that he has left the church or he is no longer LDS? I don't think so. I think it simply means that he is not putting himself in a position where he's going to be asked questions, be able to be asked about cases, where he's going to be in church with people who could appear in front of him. This is really hard in smaller communities. It's really tough when you're running into your judge in the grocery store. Back when I first started practicing, I appeared in a small community outside of Portland, Oregon. There was a judge there, and he was one of two judges on the bench in that county. And when his kids got ready to go to college, he and his family opened a pizza parlor, and their whole family ran the pizza parlor, and he put his kids through school that way. And so he put all of his kids through college running the pizza parlor. He was kind of a heavyset guy. It was named Fat Boy Pizza. And it was not at all unusual for you to appear in front of the judge, and the next day he'd show up delivering your pizza. So we don't want that to happen for any judges, and we don't want that to happen with Judge Boyce. So I think he has minimized his public contact with people. That does not mean he has left the church. Jim Archibald is a member of the church. I've heard that from other people. We know John Thomas is as well. We know the one I don't know about is Rachel Smith. The rest of them, as far as I know, they are all members. Lindsay Blake, Rob Wood, they are all members. I understand that the defense investigator may have been a church member and has since left the church. So that's what I can tell you that I know and that I've been told. And I think that that is the reason why this particular group have hesitated to go into create reasonable doubt because of her vulnerability. They didn't have to go all the way to an insanity defense in order to make that point. However, they would have had to talk about the way that people are inculcated into the LDS culture. And I think they weren't willing to go there. That's just my opinion, but I think that's why. Good questions tonight, you guys. We're almost to the 2-hour mark, so I hope we're going to wrap this up soon. 1,155 people in chat tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for being with us and for hanging out and sticking with us. It's a blast being here. I love doing these, and I really love being able to answer these questions and to have all these smart people who make me think. Tennessee girl, 79 maybe? Getting to be a little younger than me if 79 is your graduation year. If it's your birth year, holy cow. Question, isn't it true to win an appeal, they'd have to prove, if not for the 404B evidence, she would have been found not guilty? No. No. It depends upon the issue that you're arguing. She doesn't have to prove that she would be found not guilty. Now, if it's an argument over ineffective assistance of counsel, specifically ineffective assistance of counsel, you have to prove that your attorney didn't reach typical, normal, reasonable standards in the way they conducted your trial, but for their incompetence, the outcome would have been different. But that is not the case about all appellate issues. It is enough for her to be able to prove that she was prejudiced by that 404B evidence coming in. And it will be enough for her to get a new trial where they would have to treat that 404B evidence according to what the Supreme Court rules. So if the Supreme Court says, yes, she was prejudiced because they went too far into Charles Vallow's death, and so they need to revamp how they do that, and she could get a retrial for that, because they would have to revisit how they deal with the 404B evidence. So aren't her own words in the 2 phone calls enough to convict? Well, they certainly are enough to remove some reasonable doubt, I think. They certainly are enough to raise the issue with the jury of, yes, she conspired. I've seen a lot of comments tonight about Munchausen, or whatever we're calling it now, factitious something or other. There have been suggestions that Tylee's, you heard in Colby's telephone call with Lori talk about her spending hundreds of hours in the hospital with Tylee, who had pancreatitis, and I understand it's incredibly painful. And she sort of suggests that was one of the things that she was being merciful about by killing Tylee. So yeah, are her own words in those phone calls enough to convict? I don't know that those words are enough to convict, but they certainly are enough when you connect them with a lot of the other information. So there is no evidence that Lori and Tylee were involved in a Munchausen relationship. There's been some suggestion that it's possible. I don't know that that anybody has ever been able to turn up evidence of that. And it's very possible that Tylee was ill. She did have gastrointestinal issues and problems with pancreatitis. So please like and subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't. We've had this phenomenal influx of followers. Thank you so much for joining us, for believing in us. This all started out with this little newsletter and 200 subscribers to that 3 years ago. So I still do deep dives into legal issues in the newsletter. And so you can subscribe to that. And absolutely, if you did not get your questions answered tonight, because I run out of steam about hour number 2, please put them in the comments below. I answer everyone. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, email us. The email is info@theloriVallowstory.com, and I answer all those as well. So it's still not too late to quilt with us if you want to. That information's in our show notes as well. If you have suggestions or questions you want to get to us, suggestions for other things that we should be talking about, please let us know. Thank you so much tonight. Thank you all for your generous, generous donations to our moderators. It really does make a huge difference for them. And I am thrilled that I get to be the one to bless them because of your generosity. So thanks so much. I will be back next week on Saturday to do another one of these roundups, and we'll see whether my crystal ball was right and whether or not we're getting closer to wrapping this trial up. And in the meantime, please follow Gigi at Pretty Lies and Alibis. She's doing daily wrap-ups, and she's also tweeting almost continuously from the courtroom. And so that's a good resource. Nate Eaton is also tweeting almost continuously from the courtroom. I'm not, because I'm taking notes, but I hope you will all join me next week when we can dive deep into what all that testimony means. So I'm going to say once again, thanks to my moderators, and thanks to you all. And I'm going to say good night.